let's just recap real quick. The Japanese, by May of 1942, have taken the Philippines. They've taken Guam, Malaya, Wake Island. They tried to take Midway Island once successfully.
Yeah.
They've attacked Pearl Harbor. They're winning nonstop. So the U.S. needs a win.
Yeah, and a win, they need everything. But the question is, where do you start? Because there's so many places to go.
Where do you start? And how, like, you know, you want something to get back at them kind of the way they got back. You want to strike at the heart, right? They hit American soil. You know, you want to get back. How do you do that?
Well, President Roosevelt came up, by the end of Wake and everything there, he said, we need to bomb Tokyo, Japan. We need to hit them right where it counts, just like you said. And these guys, so they got to come up with a plan, but it's top secret. And the guy coming up with this plan, who's going to present this to the president and other top military officials, is Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. Now, his qualifications go back 25 years for him to be at this point. And I got to cover this for a little bit just to let you know how and why he's leading this.
He's a bad man.
Yeah, this attempt to get back at Japan there so early. So born December 14th, 1896. He enlists in the Signal Corps Reserve as a flying cadet in 1917. He's commissioned as an officer by 1918. He receives his doctorate degree from MIT in 1925. And by 1928, he's developing something to fly, like for the blind, I guess, on instruments, you know, if you're unable to see. So he completes the first flight ever on instruments, you know, years before World War II. So, and that's going to play a big role later on.
Which is crazy to think about with the technology they had at the time. I mean, even now it's crazy to think about flying without seeing. You're just using the instruments on the, you know, on the dashboard of the plane.
Yeah.
But back then, it's even crazier back then to me, man. I mean, you know, those guys are using things that the farming equipment is more advanced now than their aircraft was back then. You know,
that's true.
It's just nuts.
Well, he does all these things. He has a career in the service, and by 1930, he resigns from the Army. He works in the Shell Oil Company, and then at his own request in 1940, when things are heating up and everything, he gets back into the service there in July of 1940. Now, that's not all of his qualifications, but just to say a few for the sake of time, he's very qualified. So he comes up with this plan, and I'm sure it just sounds absolutely crazy because it was crazy. And he tells the president and these guys that I'm going to get some volunteers. I'm going to take some bombers, and I'm going to fly them off of flight decks. You know, medium bombers that are a little bit smaller than the large heavy bombers. And yeah, we're gonna bomb Japan. But by the way, it's going to be a one-way mission, and we're going to fly into after Japan. We're going to cross the little bit of ocean there and fly into China and hopefully land.
It's a one-way mission. That's just nuts to me, dude.
Yeah, one way. And we're going to hope to land in territory not occupied by the Imperial Japanese.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Very crazy story.
Well, what makes it more crazy, I would imagine, is when the guys are getting recruited for this, they can't know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they can't know. So, I mean, when they were looking for people, once this plan was approved, they're looking for their volunteers. They ask all these different airmen, and they're told that you have the opportunity to volunteer for a extremely hazardous but unspecified mission that's going to require a high degree of skill and would be of great value to our defense effort. So that's really
that's all you get fed there.
That's the sales pitch.
All right, sign me up.
and right, there was not any lack of volunteers. There were, you know.
Well, you know, another thing too. People are freaking hot right now. You know, it's everything is fresh, and Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, all the things we've been talking about. This is all fresh. So it's understandable why they would have numerous volunteers. But let's get into the training for these guys, because what they're getting ready to do is bonkers to me. So in early March of 1942, they show up for their training, and they do this down at Fort Eglin, Eglin Airfield down in Florida. They're going to train for cross-country flying, night flying. They're going to train in navigation and using instruments, using instruments only, as well as low-altitude approaches to bombing targets, rapid bombing, and evasive actions. The crews would practice. Now, this is where things get really crazy to me. Traditionally, a B-25, this is the aircraft that they're going to be using, requires 1,200 feet to take off. It needs 1,200 feet of runway to be able to get into the air. These guys are training to take it off of an aircraft carrier that gives them 450 feet of runway. So it's less than half the runway.
Yeah, that's just insane.
Which is so crazy. That is so insane to me. These are big, big planes. For an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
They're huge.
I mean, absolutely. I'm sure when you volunteer, your resume's got to look pretty good too, but
you got to be a capable pilot. And so to train for that, they would, mark out the distance or close as they could on the runways at Eglin for 450 feet. And you see it in the movie Pearl Harbor. They got to take off before they hit that line. Yeah. That's all very accurate.
And so for the B-25 Mitchell to accommodate this mission, it had to be modified. And the modifications were numerous. And mostly what it comes down to is the planes are going to be stripped to save as much weight as possible so they can add fuel tanks.
And they're going to be really stripped.
Yeah, they strip everything and anything out of it. They add fuel cells to the wings, the bomb bay, and the fuselage. So the Mitchell had a standard 646 gallons, but with these additional fuel cells, it bumps it up to 1,141 U.S. gallons. Now, the weapon systems, like the machine guns and everything, the barrels had to be removed and replaced with broomsticks painted black to make it look like barrels, just to save weight. Now, the Norden bomb site, it's a pretty cool bomb site. If you ever looked into it, it really was.
Well, it's legendary. It's legendary in World War II. We're the only country that had it, and that's what made us so effective.
Yeah, and the Bombardier, what's cool about it is it's autopilot. When you're over their targets, the Bombardier flips a switch and he takes control of the plane, makes it run straight and hits the target, releases the switch, and it goes back to the pilots. Well, that's gone. And what it's replaced with is this thing called a Mark Twain sight. And it basically it looks like a protractor. Like
compass and protractor.
Yeah, like you have to do something. I don't know how it works, but it's nothing crazy like that. So, and then the last thing they had, of course, was two of the bombers had cameras mounted in the tail of the plane to record what
you got to record it, man.
Yeah.
Did it happen if you didn't record it?
Yeah. You got to be able to see what's going on there. With the extensive training and modifications out of the way, finally selected, overall, it's 80 brave men are going to conduct this mission. And this mission is the first ever joint mission between the Army, Air Forces, and the Navy in World War II.
I mean, that's crazy, too. It's just mind-blowing to me that they're taking these big freaking bombers off of aircraft carriers.
Yeah, it is something absolutely insane. Like, one wing is going to be hanging over the flight deck, like over the ocean, and then the other wing clears the tower by like something crazy like 4 inches.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's really, really nuts. So, and it was approved. But anyway, so at a secret conference in San Francisco, Jimmy Doolittle meets up with Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey, and they discuss what they're going to be doing. And so they agree upon 400 miles due east of Japan. Halsey's going to bring Doolittle and his men right to the doorsteps of the Empire of Japan. They will launch planes. However, if discovered, Halsey said it's going to be, launch planes immediately, and then I got to get out of there.
Yeah.
So that's the deal, and they go with it. So by April 1st, 16 modified B-25s are loaded up onto the USS Hornet, and they set sail from Alameda, California, where Jimmy Doolittle was born. They're going to set sail, and they're going to link up with the USS Enterprise, forming part of Halsey's Task Force 16. So these guys have a little bit of ground to cover. Now, meanwhile, that this is happening, of course, like anything, we're doing it too. So the Japanese are listening to our radio chatter, and they're trying to decipher the plans and what we're talking about, what we're doing. And that's kind of the only advantage they have at the time, but they didn't have radar. They lacked radar, but to make up for that, they employed these patrol boats. And this is going to go across a very vast Pacific region. And they're basically fishing boats equipped with radios. And that's their early warning detection. Yeah. So they're going to encounter Task Force 16. They're going to encounter a lot of these. Now, they're getting into crazy waters here by April 18th. So April 18th is the day of the attack, of the raid, I should say.
They're deep into enemy territory.
Deep, and they're on the other side of the Pacific at this point. And what happens is, by the cover of darkness, anytime they see one of these patrol boats on the radar screen, they're just going to change course and continue to set, a new course, continue on to Japan as time goes on. However, by 7:38 in the morning, the sun's up, and one of these little patrol boats is spotted. And it's actually, this sounds crazy to me, but it's spotted 20,000 yards from the USS Hornet, which is equivalent to 11 miles.
Yeah. So that's a long ways, but you think the ocean's so flat, dude, something stands out.
Yeah.
Stuff stands out on the ocean.
So the USS Nashville immediately fires upon this ship and sinks it, but the Hornet's radio room picked up an outgoing transmission. So
the gig is up.
They weren't able to smash them in time, but
it's go time, gentlemen.
Yeah. And the reason why it's becoming so urgent now is because Halsey's task force, it's only half of his task force. So in the event, being so far into enemy territory, if they run into a Japanese naval and air force, they could be greatly outmatched in comparison to what they've seen before. So, it's time. So the plan was to go for 400 miles. They're going to turn into the wind and launch at about 650 miles out from Japan. So Halsey gives the order to the Hornet. He says, launch planes to Colonel Doolittle and Gallant Command. Good luck and God bless you.
And the raid is on.
And the raid's on. So the guys, they come out, they're coming out 10 hours ahead of time and over 200 miles further than expected.
Yikes.
So to say the least, they board their planes, they turn into the wind, and leading from the front is none other than Jimmy Doolittle himself, and as crew number one, pilot, and he takes to the sky, launches this thing into the air.
And the Doolittle raid begins.
Yeah, so it's incredible. It's really incredible footage. But lastly here, despite heavy seas, it took just over an hour for all 16 of them to launch, and all 16 launched without incident.
Because you have the footage, the real footage of the one coming off the end of the aircraft carrier and dipping below the lip of the aircraft carrier. It looks like it's going to go in the water, and then it just picks right back up.
Yeah,
it is crazy to watch, man.
But they all made it successfully.
And just so everybody knows, they're going after multiple targets. These are going to be munitions factories, barracks, things like that. But there's 10 targets in Tokyo. There's 2 in Yokohama, and then there's 1 each in Yokosuka, Nagoya. I apologize, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka. Now the flight is kind of proceeding as planned. And things are going all right. They launched. Doolittle's group's approaching Tokyo from the north. The raiders are going to fly as low as the terrain is going to permit them to fly. How high above the water were they flying?
Oh, like 200 yards, single file, just
crazy,
just low as they can, just a way.
So I would imagine they're keeping probably that same altitude coming over the land as best they can.
Yeah, probably just as little over treetop as possible.
Now, roughly, this is interesting. Roughly 10 miles north of Tokyo, the group is going to spot 9 Japanese fighters. Now, you've already mentioned that all the guns on the plane have been replaced with broomsticks that have been painted black. So if those fighters decide to turn and intercept these B-25s, they're done for.
Oh, 9
There's
fighters.
No way they have nothing they can fight back with.
That would be it.
For whatever reason, those Japanese fighters don't do anything. I don't know if they don't see them or what, but they don't engage. They just let them on. They let them go. So, the raiders began to climb as they got nearer to the targets to a bombing altitude of 1,200 feet. They got over their targets, dropped their bombs, and then dipped back down to tree level and flew west over the outskirts of the city and on their way.
Awesome.
I mean, you think about, they say in the movie it's a pinprick in the heart of Japan. Dude, just Tokyo. They bombed Tokyo.
Yeah.
And they did it in a gangster fashion.
Gangsters, right?
I mean, let's take bombers off of aircraft carriers. It normally needs 1,200 feet. I only need 450 feet.
Yep.
Like, that's insane to me, dude.
They probably thought they were protected at that distance at that time.
There's an estimated 14 tons of bombs dropped on Japanese targets in this raid. Air crews are going to claim hits on virtually all of the assigned targets that they were given.
Nice.
It's just incredible. But anyways, the 16 B-25s are on their way to the China mainland.
Wow. So they basically did this untouched, like total surprise, unscathed, made a move, and it worked.
Hooking and jabbing, man. Hooking and jabbing.
So yeah, heading towards the China coast, as the plan had specified it, they're going to land in hopefully friendly territory once reaching bases in China. However, the weather took a terrible change. It is like this horrendous thunderstorm that comes out of nowhere. They had clear skies over Japan, but coming over into China, it takes a turn for the worse. So they reach the coast. They're gaining altitude as high as they possibly can, and about 6,000 to 9,000 feet up in the air, and they're running out of fuel. Fuel gauges coming empty. All sorts of. It's starting to get pretty.
Things are looking serious.
Terribly serious. Now, Doolittle's going to attempt to reach Chuchao, this base there, by radio. It doesn't get any response. Nothing. And that's kind of where he's headed. Now, his co-pilot, they're making the decision to bail out. Jimmy Doolittle, they're out of fuel, everything. And his co-pilot, Dick Cole, he's a 25-year-old officer. And while Doolittle mans the controls, this guy is going to jump out. He's going to bail out. And this is what he said later about it, was, our only course of action was to climb up to what we thought was a safe altitude and fly until we ran out of fuel, then bailed out. Well, after the whole crew bails out, the crew of 5, Jimmy Doolittle bails out himself. And he looks at the clock on the instrument panel, and it was 9:20 p.m. It was exactly 13 hours since he had taken off prior from the Hornet. 15 crews had crash landed or bailed out in the occupied China, and one crew number 8, they had suffered some mechanical issues and knew they couldn't make it to the coastline by their calculations. And mind you, they're flying on instruments because of this storm in the dark. And they kind of divert to the Soviet Union. Now, they hope to, when they get to the Soviet Union, they hope to refuel there. Like they were kind of get a free ticket to ride, refuel, and then make their way onward into China. But that wasn't the case. The Soviet Unions, they interred them for 13 months because they had some type of an agreement with Japan. And they don't want to be caught up with like harboring United States pilots to just bomb Tokyo. So they were like, we got to keep this hush-hush. You got to stay here for a little while. So they weren't POWs, but they weren't free to go. Yeah. And they stayed there for a long time. And that was, there. So, but the 5-man crew, they eventually did escape. I say escape with these quotes marks there, into Persia, and they returned home by May of 1943. Now, the immediate results of Tokyo's bombing. Now, the Japanese capital obviously is enormous. It's Admiral Yamato Isoroku's fear of a U.S. carrier strike. He had basically told his people everything, that this was unreasonable, this could not happen, there's nothing to worry about. Well, it happened completely unimpeded. American planes flying over there. Just 4 months and 11 days from Pearl Harbor and all the other attacks across the Pacific region, American airmen bombed Tokyo, and this provided a very important boost in American morale in the early months of World War II, after not having much to go off of other than, Wake. But things that had eventually gone south there.
You think about it this way: Wake was like the jab to set up the right cross. Of the Doolittle raid. You know?
This was not as big as like other things that are going to happen, but like anything, like you said, the pinpoint in the heart of Japan, like it did its job, and really, I could only imagine what crippling effect it had in Japan on their people and their trust in their government, but also not only just in Japan, but like talk about across Europe, because this, by this time, Germany and Italy had already declared war upon the United States back in December. So now this strike in Tokyo, the rest of the Axis powers must also kind of be thinking like, whoa, where else could this happen?
For real.
And so, the Japanese were super frustrated, to say the least, that they couldn't get at they couldn't get our carriers. They couldn't find a task force that launched the planes. They couldn't knock the planes out of the sky. All they could do was capture some of our guys that they were able to capture in China and torture and kill some of them. But yeah, these guys, they really, in something that's never happened before, they made it happen. It was incredible.
How many of the original airmen make it back to the United States?
Yeah, good question there. So 2 days later, on April 20th, Doolittle's crew, they're escorted by local Chinese, and they reach the embassy in Chongqing. And he's going to wire back. Well, they got 4 additional crews with them. And he wires back and gives a report to General Henry Hap Arnold. And he says, quote, Tokyo successfully bombed. Due to bad weather on the China coast, believe all airplanes wrecked. 5 crews found safe in China so far. That's the only word that they had. Now, ultimately, 73 of the 80 men are going to survive the raid. 3 of them were killed in action, bailing out or crashing in China, and the other 8 became POWs. And of those 8 POWs, 4 of them were executed by the Japanese. So another horrendous continuation of everything that's been going on,
but
in that area.
Needless to say, the mission was a success. I mean, you think about this in the grand scheme of things. It's not as pivotal. It's not as destructive as the attack at Pearl Harbor. But dude, what a bit of psychological warfare that is. You know what I mean? You can touch it. We'll reach out and touch you back. You know, and we'll actually get on your homeland, like your capital. We're gonna smoke it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Hawaii is obviously that's American. That's American soil. But it would be the equivalent of, it would have been like the Japanese bombing Washington D.C.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this clip from America Fog of War, catch the rest of the episode here.